ontologically, epistemologically, phenomenologically, and because the process of waking up is informed by our thinking, informed by how we conceptualize and contextualize our experience. But it's a process. Once we move over into fixed dogmatic thinking, we're taking the relative and relating to it as if it was an absolute. Does that make sense? No. Sort of? No. You all look dazed. Makes sense to me. But I've been thinking about it for quite a while. If you hold on to some conclusion you've arrived at about yourself, about existence, about another person, and say, this is so, the nature of that kind of assertion denies the subjectivity of it. You know, maybe if we said something like this: in this moment, given what's being experienced, which is an interplay of the biases I bring forward and the data that comes in, this conclusion arises. Then we might say, in observing carefully, that conclusion is held onto and given conviction. And when it's held onto and given conviction, then it feels like a reliable, consistent, permanent truth. Does that make sense? Thank you. He nodded his head. So then what we do is we take the subjective, we take the impermanent. You know, if we go back to quantum physics, it's telling us this is a unique event of the moment. And even the moment itself is a construct. So embarrassed to get intrigued by your own thinking and talking. I won't. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like you to do a little experiment, because here's what I want. Here's the argument and the experience I want to present. We're always inside of what's happening. We're not outside of it. Now, when we sit here with our arms folded and we hear someone talk, and we're all engaged in abstract thinking, you know, it gives us a sense of we are talking about some permanent, consistent reality because we're capable of thinking about it. But even if every one of us agree entirely and are completely committed to it, it's still just a consensual construct that we're involving ourselves in. So from a Zen perspective, from the methodology of discovery and not abiding by or holding on to pre-established conclusions, the methodology of discovery, this is at the heart of waking up from an Eastern perspective. So this exercise that we're going to do right now is about the methodology of discovery. So I would ask you if you would, and I don't think it will cause you any permanent damage, mentally or physically. So I'd ask you if you would stand up. It'll be brief. But no, stay beside your seat. And So we live in a physical world, and we walk into a room and we make all sorts of wonderful assumptions. Now, here's the experiment. To sit down without taking for granted that the chair is going to support your weight. Okay? Please. And notice what that's like. You really take it on. Take it on. It makes it much more fun if you do it. Like sit down slowly, deliberately, as if you don't know the chair is going to support your weight. For the sake of time, I won't ask you what your experience was. And here's what I was getting at. This process of discovery asks us to suspend all the assumptions, presumptions that we're making about reality. So then there's an interesting question. How does a human being do that? And I'll come back to that. And also, when we lessen the presumptions, and it can be anything. You can not make an assumption. You know what drinking water tastes like, or tasting anything, and taste it as if you've never tasted it before. Carl Jung said, I remind myself that even if I've had 100 sessions with this client, I don't know who they are, and I'm meeting them for the first time. It's like this not knowing, this not presuming, because when we presume a knowledge, when we presume a knowing, we're setting up a bias. And we're even limiting our capacity to attend. If you know everything that's happening, well, why should you even bother to attend to it? You already know. If you switch it around and you don't know, if you don't even know how to sit in a seat, sitting down, the way your body moves into the seat, the way the body supports your weight, the way you make contact, the way it shifts how your mind, your consciousness is working. So in more Eastern thinking, this process of engagement is crucial. The process is more crucial than the conclusions. The conclusions are relative. They're subject to our consensual reality. They're subject to our personal bias. But the process is something that can be communicated. So this is why, as for those of you who looked at some Zen material, often Zen material doesn't offer a linear logic. What were you before your parents were born? Well, what it's asking us to do, one way to think about that, to think about it, is to not know. What if I let go of all the assumptions I have about who I am and what the world is, and came into a more immediate, raw experience? So in this wonderful exchange between Varela and the Dalai Lama, they had this kind of interaction, and we'll demonstrate our own. modest version of it in a little bit. But I hope that made sense, because I'm going to skip on. Did that make sense? Or yeah, the proposition of process rather than conclusion. No? Now, within the process, what can we say about consciousness? And so Buddhism would say this: there are characteristics, observable characteristics about consciousness. And that in attending to these characteristics, we can see the composition of a human experience, and we can see how to work with it, that the very capacity for perception and attention can be enhanced. And one of the factors of consciousness is that as consciousness settles, it becomes more perceptive. I think we've all heard the example of someone saying, well, I was in this crisis. I was in a car accident, and everything started to move in slow motion. In the heightened crisis of the experience, we're triggered into a heightened alertness, a heightened attention. And in that heightened attention, perception is enhanced. And we start to notice more and more details. And it seems like, subjectively, it seems like time slows down. So here's the schema of the construct of consciousness within Eastern thinking. That there are several factors that are involved in every moment. There are other factors that help to support that. And then there are a variety of factors that may or may not be present. And then within Buddhism, in the service of clarity, in the service of waking up to the subjective experience. Because when we wake up to the subjective experience, the more thoroughly we wake up to it, the more we're capable of causing ourselves and others less suffering, and the more capable we are of bringing forth for ourselves and others a sense of joy, happiness, stability, and harmony with all beings. So it's interesting, you know, you can read into that, if you will, a morality, or not. Well, you can say that's just an existential urge of a human being to be happy, to be content, to be in a stable, harmonious experience, and to suffer less. Either way, the intention of this element of Buddhist practice is to increase the happiness and decrease the suffering. So the factors that are elemental to every moment is there's contact. There is a visceral feeling response below the level of emotions. I was talking to Urban this morning, and there's a local researcher whose name I don't know, maybe some of you know, and he was saying that in his book that when he examines the neurology of emotion, There are a variety of neurological patterns that create our emotions. And so some of them are triggered by cognitive processes. We think of the world, we think of a person a certain way, and it triggers emotions, it triggers feelings. Some of them are visceral, some of them are pre-thought. That's what this is getting here. It's saying we make contact, and there's a visceral response. Something precognitive, maybe even pre-emotional, but with that kind of feeling quality to it. Then there's also the initial inkling of perception. It's not fully formulated, with attitudes and understandings. It's just that initial perception. And that stimulates, it inclines us towards a certain kind of response. Stimulus is at the basis of an intention. And then that basic intention then sharpens itself into a more purposeful engagement. And then and I'll stop there, and I'll give you a reference to this article which you can look up. Because within the sophistication of Buddhist psychology, there are 52 factors. 6 of them are universal, they always happen. Another 6 or 7 depend upon which school of description you believe. Often happen. And then there's 2 categories. These are the categories, when these factors arise, they cause more suffering, and when these factors arise, they cause more clarity, more settledness, more sense of grounded presence. And quite literally, the nature of the endeavor of Buddhism is to literally create the possibility for the positive factors and discover how not to repeatedly get stuck in the negative factors. Let me just offer you a few and this might start to feel more moral or ethical. The negative factors: greed, hatred, delusion, envy, lack of self-confidence. And then on the other side, trust, a certain kind of confidence, okayness about being in the moment. And then also an absence of greed, an absence of hatred. So at this extension, you could argue, well, then Buddhism is becoming a religion or a moral code. And equally, you could also that it's not. You can just say it's the cultivation of the skillful cultivation of consciousness, so that it promotes happiness and lessens suffering. Should I stop there? Okay, you can think about that for a little more. Now, one way to think about this is that it's not possible to have a pure experience. that of these 52 factors, like in the text where it talks about them, it says of these 50, it says it's like a king with his entourage. You know? The king doesn't go anywhere without an accompaniment of different people. The moment of consciousness doesn't arise without an accompaniment, an array of these factors. To think of something like bare attention, pure consciousness, is illusory. It is possible with diligent and determined training and in deep meditation to narrow consciousness down to where quite literally it doesn't experience a perception of time or space, of self or cognition. But in that state, we're back into the absolute reality. Nothing can be said. So the challenge is, can we cultivate a perceptiveness that in the midst of this array of accompanying factors that arise in the moment, that we can start to notice them? You know? And this is the fundamental request that the heritage of Zen practice tries to create. Okay? Like Zen practice would say, whether you call this a religion or just cultivation of consciousness is your personal choice. Here's the process by which awareness of the momentary experience can happen. To have that experience and then to see how it influences. You know? How we enter a moment and we have an experience of it and we want to reify it, but can we, rather than doing that, can we become aware of the process of the moment coming into being? And I have another experiment in relationship to that, but what do you think? Sure. You all look a little dazed. Is that making sense? I mean, is it just kind of utterly obvious, or is it like bewilderingly outside your usual way of thinking? Any response to that question? Is that making sense, what I'm saying? Yeah? Maybe? Yeah. Okay. Well, here's what, and you can tell me, here was the experiential exercise I had in mind. We literally sit beside, opposite, facing someone else, and they ask you a question. And what they're asking you is, what's happening now? Because when we're noting what's happening in the moment, two things are happening for us. There's awareness of what's happening in the moment, and there's an appreciation of awareness. Let me read you a little bit from maybe in her eloquence. This is a little piece from a poet who wrote a book on. So this experience of being aware of the moment and being aware of being aware, aware of the moment and aware of being aware on a continual basis is called